Welcome back, everyone. Today we will be finishing up everything that is in the bell housing. So that means clutch release bearing. We have the yoke and the shafts and the clutch pedal and the linkage. All of it is on the bench, and all of it is unique prototype 10X stuff. Very little of what's here bears any resemblance at all to the production version. First, we are going to start with the clutch release bearing, and this one is as dry and rough as I've ever found one. And I think I know why. It all ties back to the prototype design. But before we expand upon that, we need to change this out. These are usually a pretty easy press. Not usually on too tight at all. Very good. Okay, we can discard the old release bearing, and now the carrier for it is pretty basic. All right, no holes in it, no groove on the inside. Really, it just has to hold that bearing. This is the prototype one. We have a 10X number right here that has been etched into it, and there's no way we're going to get everything on camera. I can barely see it with my eye, but right off the end of my thumb, you can see the 10 right there, followed by an X. And then the next two numbers are illegible, but it ends with a 22. We can see the 22 rather clearly. So it's a 10X something something 22. That's as close as I can get you. But luckily, X231 uses the same release bearing as the earlier model ZB tractors, as well as the production 445. So it was no trouble at all finding a new one. And this is a modern style, lubed for life, completely sealed bearing, which for once is going to work perfectly with the raw prototype nature of this tractor. So let's get that put on real quick. All right, much better, much better. So compare and contrast time. We've got a production 445 release bearing and carrier, and here's how they did it on all the production tractors. And this is something I don't really understand about X231 because, well, the production one, you can see we've got this grease tube comes off of it, and there's it threads into the case. There's a fitting out here so you can actually get grease all the way into the carrier. We got two holes on the inside. Use this to point with. I didn't think this out. So the grease tube feeds through this top hole, and then it'll get grease down into this groove, which lubricates where this carrier slides on the tube that comes out of the front of the transmission. And then the grease will also go into this second hole down here, which feeds it into the release bearing, and it keeps everything happy. But X231 has none of that. There are no holes. There was never a fitting in here. This is the 10X carrier for the bearing, and well, we need to bring this little tiny plug with us. So we come over to the transmission area here. So you can see X231's case is drilled for that greasing provision. We have 1/8" pipe thread out here, and that feeds into this hole right here, which is tapped also for 1/8 pipe on the inside. So that is where a grease circ would have been out here, and then the grease tube would have attached right there. It would have came over to the carrier, or it could have, I should say, because that slides on the tube that comes out right there, and everything would have been just fine. But all I found on the outside was this slotted head plug. So they had that blocked off right from the start, and if we can get pipe threads to start on camera, it's a miracle. But there we are. We're just going to get it put in right now because this is original configuration, from what I can tell, of this tractor, because this obviously never had a fitting in it. Now, that doesn't really worry me in this case because, as I mentioned, these new bearings are all completely sealed. Okay, so we don't have to worry about this not getting grease. It already has all the grease that it needs. The only other issue would be if this starts getting dry where it has to slide on that tube. We have the benefit, though, of this mystery hole over here. I still don't know exactly what that's for, and I can bet that was not done down on the farm because it wasn't done with a torch. So if I ever have trouble with this getting dry on that tube, I always have the option of coming in through here with a grease needle or something and being able to get some form of lubrication in that area. So I really don't think it's going to cause us any problems. Just another curious prototype oddity of X231. So for now, we put this off to the side. Next, we start concentrating on bell housing clutch release components. Okay, prototype on the bottom, production on the top. We're similar yet different. Once again, we'll start with the fork, and this had a 10X number, and of course they put the hole right through most of it again. Looks like it ended with a 2. That's all we have left right there. This lever is a 10X 5763, and you can tell there's a lot of extra holes in it. We've got 2 slightly misaligned holes there, and on the other side, then finally a roll pin through that. They had this lever clocked differently in relation to the shaft at one point in time, and I believe that was due to a design change because we know from the archive photos there was a lot more going on with this clutch linkage, I believe as a part of a first generation Ampli-Torque high-low range than what we have now. So compare that with the production pieces. Our fork is a 10A 12583. One major difference is they use these rollers for acting directly upon the ears of that release bearing carrier. That was a much lower wear setup than having them just cast solid into the fork. And as you would expect, the production roll pins the fork to the shafts, whereas the prototype actually uses these 7/16 bolts. And we had some movement going on. We gulled some threads because these bolts pass through those cutouts to help to keep everything from twisting. So I didn't have any more 7/16 Rockford bolts, but I have some new ones on order that are going to be showing up in a couple days. So for now, we'll just tentatively use these old ones. We've got better coming. And once again, on the lubrication front, you can tell we've got a lot more thought that's been put into helping these production shafts to last than what we have on the prototype. The prototype has no provisions for adding grease, but honestly, you can see a little bit of a step there, but they're really not worn that bad, all things considered. So the production ones, they drilled for grease zerks at the end of each shaft, and then that's a grease passage that comes into this drilling, and that drilling is located, as you can see from the witness mark from the wear, right in the case bore on each one. So that helps to keep a lot of lubrication on those pivoting points. But once again, I don't think X231 was really designed to be a high hour machine, even though it went on to be. You can tell a lot of this stuff was just left good enough. They probably made engineering notes saying we're going to add all this stuff when it comes to production time, but on the prototype, it just wasn't a worry. So about the best we can do here is just start out with grease on all of our pivots, and I'm pretty sure we're going to be just fine. Get that cut out in the shaft lined up with the bolt hole. Once again, we're just using these old worn bolts for now, just to hold everything together. Do the same thing with this one. Line up the cutout with the bolt hole. If I get my hand out of the way, you might be able to see what's happening. So we can go back now to the release bearing and the carrier. We also need these 2 return springs. They pull on the carrier. And we need this clip. That's what the return springs anchor to. So another area where the prototype differs from the production. You can see in the parts manual diagram, number 25 is that same clip. And we have number 24. That is one of these springs. But when we took X231 apart, we found 2 springs pulling on that release bearing. And another difference was the clip was pointed down originally. I think I'm going to position it like the parts manual diagram shows, with it facing up instead, because that's going to give me a more direct rearward pull on that release bearing. So the reason why I think the production only had one spring on that bearing and not two is because they have number 34. That's a second spring that is hooked to the clutch pedal and also pulling the clutch pedal up. So those two springs work in tandem with one another. The prototype does not have a spring on the pedal, so I believe that's why we've got a double setup on the release bearing, and that's the way I'm going to keep it. So clip goes on the bottom stud. And next, the release bearing. Everything well greased, of course. And finally, we'll hook the springs. Test it out real quick. Seems all right. Now we can begin hanging the clutch pedal. It gets fun at this point. 10X5528. We have a little bit of boot wear going on up here, but for the most part, everything's pretty sharp yet. I've seen them a lot worse. Heavy duty flange on the outside. Keep your foot from sliding off sideways. As usual, it's quite heavy duty, as the prototype pieces typically are. We've got this tang on the top, and I don't know what it's for. It's got that threaded hole in it, and all that was in there was a bunch of hard packed grease and dirt. That could be from linkages past, something that was bypassed, eliminated. We have this ear on the bottom, another through hole. We'll do the compare and contrast between prototype and production. As usual, the production's a lot lighter duty. I'd say in this case, it's about half as heavy. The production 10A7466 casting number, and they don't go on opposite sides of the tractor. They just attach differently. The prototype pivots at the back, the production pivots at the front, and it's a lot more streamlined system. Once I get this one hung on the transmission, the difference will be quite evident. So we also have this linkage rod that runs forward. It has to go into that ear down there, so we're just 90'd on the end. Cotter pin holds all that together, and this jam nut and bell crank has to go up on the threaded part. We'll just start with a decent midway adjustment for now, because all of this is going to have to be reset as we build the tractor up. We're pinned on this end, so the pedal's ready to go. We need these two washers, that cross pin, and we can head on over to the tractor. The thicker spacer washer goes on the peg first, and then the pedal, and we are not going to grease this pivot yet because this is mock-up only at this point. When it comes time for priming, painting, this pedal will be taken back off. Thinner washer goes on the outside, and new cotter pin holds it all on the peg. And finally, the linkage rod connection. 2 hands required for this step though. Line the pin and just drop a cotter pin in for now. And here is how it works. I have to admit, it is smooth. Everything travels just so, but it is incredibly redundant to pivot a pedal at the back, run a linkage to the front, to another pivot to the bell. I'll show you how they streamlined it on the production version. I've got it just quickly knocked together on the bench, and this is all they did. Fork goes in the bell housing, pedal attaches directly to that. That's how you get your pivot. And to adjust pedal free travel, we have this notch right here. You just tighten that bolt down wherever the pedal travel is best. That's your whole setup right there. Quicker to assemble, easier, cheaper to make. Not nearly as cool as this, but prototypes didn't necessarily have to be the most efficient. I do like it though. That means all that we've got left today is this cover for the engine timing inspection hole. And it's not so much that this piece needed to go on right now, it's just that I had it cleaned up, and that's a few less small pieces that I have to try and keep track of off of the tractor. So good to have those in place. I know I can't lose them now. Okay, everybody, we've got another one in the books. Good news, bad news type of situation, though. The good news is we've got all three of the main sub-assemblies for X231 complete. And I've had a few questions lately. What needs to be done to the engine? Everybody, I make playlists of all these projects. That's why I go to all that trouble. And the X231 playlist, the first dozen or so videos, are of us rebuilding this long block back to 100% about 4 years ago. So playlists, it's all in one convenient place. Click on them, all questions will be answered. So we've got long block, 100%. Then we moved on to the rear end. We did our line boring repair. We've got the rear end built back as close to 100% as we can get. And we have just finished the transmission portion as close to 100% as we can get. Here's the bad news part. Before any of these three main pieces can go together, I have to completely sort all the problems that are in front of us right here. This is the live power shaft, all right? It splines into the flywheel that goes on the back of the engine, goes through the transmission, through the back end, and attaches at the rear. And there is a lot of problems. This is the live power PTO clutch. This is the piece that killed X231 back on the farm. This is the one that lost the clutch dog, rattled around, bound the gears, grenaded the whole back end, and you can see we've got ripped and torn links. The spider, it looks like it had broken once, and they had brazed ears back on, and it broke again. That's what led to the eventual catastrophic failure. These bushings, for some reason, they chose these super thin wall ones. They've since collapsed, and I'm sure they were loose in there, allowing this drum to oscillate, which probably further exacerbated the failure. All kinds of problems with the shaft. A bunch of problems back here where the bearings go into that bore back there, so all those chickens are about to come home to roost. We've got problems with the splines at the front, horribly worn on the shaft. And I don't even know what I'm looking at right here. I believe this is an earlier model ZB flywheel that they Dutch keyed this custom straight spline sleeve into. And hear that clicking? That is loose. So we have major problems here, major problems there, major problems there. I currently have no plan, no parts for any of that. Major problems here. I think I have parts to address it. And then we'll see how our line bore job ends up with the shaft. So we're up against kind of a point with X231 where it's going to be a lot of tedious work, and it's very likely that I'm going to be needing parts that I don't even have yet. So if you all remember the beginning of February when we picked back up on X231, I said specifically in that first episode back, we're going to try this for a few weeks, feel it out, see how well it does. So I've given it the whole month of February. That was kind of my goal. And it's doing better than it did the first time around, but it's honestly still not great. I'm maxing out about 10,000 views less on every episode of X231 as I was doing up to this point. And I've been able to offset the slightly lower view counts by just trying to crank out more watch minutes and more regular, frequent content just to keep everybody in something to watch. And so far, that's been evening everything back out. The problem is, with this area that we're getting into right now, it's not conducive to regular uploads or lots of watch minutes. There are a lot of unknowns, and it's going to be a lot of tedious and very time-consuming work trying to figure out how to address all these problems. And first, even forming a plan, I don't really even have a starting point with it. So we're kind of in another scenario where we could either just, I think, swap out all production parts, be done with it, or I can put a lot of effort into trying to save as many of these prototype parts as possible. Although I'm telling you right now, just from what I can see here, it's going to require a lot of changes to a lot of these old parts. The existing design is gone. It's destroyed. So it's kind of where we are with X231. I don't know. We might hang on with it another couple weeks, but eventually, I know some of you have noticed all these Steiner boxes down here below the bench, all that stuff. That is Farmall H kind of cosmetic restoration prep parts right there. And being that that is a tractor I actually use for things, and X231 would only be a parade queen at best. we're going to get into late winter, very early spring, I am going to be moving off of X231 again to roll into getting some fresh paint on that H. I think a fresh paint project would get a lot of eyeballs on the channel. New fresh paint always does well. Does way better than the mechanical stuff. And that's a cosmetic restoration I've been wanting to do to that tractor for a while. And I'd like to have it done before fall and plow days and all that start up. So you all kind of have the lay of the land here with X231. We're going to bang on it a little longer. We're entering some very difficult times with it now. This is what killed this tractor originally. We have to get this part right. That's the end of my rambling. Thank you for watching, everyone. We have made some great progress in roughly a month. I've been able to keep the wheels turning pretty good. So, and thank you for the viewership. All right, everybody, that's it. Hope to see y'all back again.